whole bunch of stuff that really didn't work out. And was there a story about Thomas Edison coming to him with this idea of a light bulb, or was that all fiction?
There is a story. I think it may be apocryphal. I
Okay.
could be wrong on that because I've never looked into it. But you're absolutely right. In the mainstream, he came to Hartford and he was fascinated by the town's business. Hartford was a city that produced a tremendous amount of wealth in the 1870s. There was manufacturing everywhere. The insurance
good old
companies
times.
were thriving. It was a very, very busy and sophisticated place, and he sort of became entranced by that, and the Yankee ingenuity that as a Southerner entranced him, and he made investments that were not very smart. The most famous one being in a mechanical typesetting machine. When he was a young man, he had set type for printers by hand, so he thought anyone would buy a mechanical typesetting machine because it takes the place of all this tedious drudgery
Sure.
and labor. He was right that was in the works, but it was not that mechanical typesetting machine.
Yeah, he had the wrong guy, but the right idea.
Exactly. He was backing the wrong horse. He was backing Beta over VHS.
Along those lines, who was it? Who was his good friend that kind of came and sort of rescued him financially, helped him get back on track again, and really took over his money?
Right. When in the 1890s, they actually had to leave Hartford because of this financial trouble. And oddly enough, in those days, you could spend a lot less money by going off to Europe and living in hotels with one or two servants and live off the cheap life there. Plus, he could earn money by writing books about things that he saw and by performing lectures. So they left. In 1894, they actually declared bankruptcy, and that's when it appeared. It was actually publicized in the Hartford Courant that it was his wife. The house was in the name of his wife, so the house itself would not be attached by his creditors. But it was fortunately by then he was famous, and Henry Huddleston Rogers, who was a Standard Oil executive, is the fellow you're talking about, who kind of took him under his wing, befriended him, guided his investments, and Sam Clemens worked very, very hard to get his money back, and so it was a combination of very hard work and finally an intelligent guidance of his finances that got him back into a position where in 1907 he was able to build another Connecticut house, which is something people don't know that he after having lived in Europe and then later in New York City, he moved back to Reading, Connecticut.
Reading, that's where he died, right?
Toward the very end of his life.
Yep.
Built another house completely unlike the house you see in Hartford. The house in Hartford, if you know it, is a wild Gothic masterpiece with all sorts of carpentry work in the porches and decorated bricks and really a wild 1870s concoction, Victorian pile, they used to call it. But this house in Reading was more like an Italian villa. It had rounded arches and porches, and it was on top of a hill.
So he went kind of back in time. He went from Gothic to Romanesque.
Yeah. Well, he had spent time living in various actual Italian villas, so I think that might have given him the idea. And that's where he spent, as you said, his last days. That's where he died. That house is sadly no longer standing. It burned in the 1920s.
Now, one other little factoid of Twain that not a lot of people know is, I think I'm correct on this, did he not also help Ulysses S. Grant write Grant's autobiography?
There's a lot. There's a story that he helped him write it. I don't think that's ever been confirmed. Grant had been a wonderful general and a pretty crappy president. And I think people felt that he probably couldn't have written as clearly as he wrote about the Civil War in his memoirs. It was mainly about the Civil War. It was not so much about his presidency. He had a wonderful plain style, and everyone thought, well, he must have had help. And look, his publisher was Mark Twain. It must have been Mark Twain who helped him. But I don't think so. I think it was Grant managed that on his own. Twain did definitely help him out. It was a time when former war heroes and presidents were not always that financially well off. He didn't have a big pension.
Sure.
And his family was looking to fall into poverty if he didn't finish his memoirs by the time he died. And Mark Twain sort of encouraged this, gave him a big advance. At that point, he wasn't in such terrible shape himself. And Grant, toward the very end of his life, while he was dying of throat cancer, actually wrote out all of his memoirs, finished them just shortly before his own death, and left his widow in a very good shape. At the Mark Twain House in the billiard room, we have a reproduction of the check that he wrote to her for $200,000.
Wow.
Which in those days, if you multiplied that by 40, you might get something equivalent to what it would be in today's money.
Where's my HP12C? I'm looking at my financial calculator. Go ahead.
Sort of going from Grant, and we were talking a little bit before the show started. You said questions that inevitably come up would be what would he say about what's going on today? And as much as we all have our own favorite Mark Twain quotes, this one, it could possibly be shown by facts and figures that there is no distinctly native criminal class except Congress.
Yes.
Is that how he felt about government in general and politics in general, or?
Yeah, like many people, he was frustrated by the American democratic process. He did spend a lot of time observing Congress. He actually was even the secretary to a Nevada senator, which isn't very well known, just shortly before he came to Hartford for the first time. But he got a view of Congress. He visited it as a boy. He came to Washington and saw the pre-Civil War Congress at work. He saw Congress after the war while he was working for this senator. And of course, the most famous thing he says, which is what the great actor Hal Holbrook always begins his performances with, is the line, "Suppose I was a member of Congress, and suppose I was an idiot, but I repeat myself."
Yep.
Very good.
But Holbrook, while I'm talking about Hal Holbrook, as you may know.
Is he still doing that one-man show?
He's still doing his one-man Mark Twain show. How
old is Hal?
He started in 1954 when he needed a lot of makeup to look as old as Mark Twain. Now he
needs a lot of makeup to look not too old.
Now he's 10 years older than Mark Twain himself ever got to be. So, and he's still on the stage. He's, as you know, been performing in films too. But this past year, he found a new Mark Twain quotation he had never used before, and he thought it was so.
Is that possible? After 60 years of being Mark Twain, you found something?
Well, he's
been doing Mark Twain just about as long as Mark Twain did Mark Twain.
Yes, well, yeah, exactly, or even longer maybe. He's a wonderful guy. He's old enough so that Mark Twain's daughter actually gave her approval to his performance. She said, "You're just like my dad."
Wow.
But recently, he's like everyone else. He's sometimes a little frustrated with the way things are going, and he found in the masses of material that Mark Twain left behind. Out in California at the University of California at Berkeley, they have Mark Twain's papers, just thousands and thousands of pages of stuff that has never seen print. And out of this, scholars sometimes cull interesting statements. And this is what Mark Twain, what Hal Holbrook found and worked into his routine this year.
You know what? Actually, this would be a great little teaser to come back right after the break to keep the audience. So we have to get the local music spotlight in. So let's do that now, and then we'll come back for the hidden words of Mark Twain. All right, we'll be right back. It's The Breakdown on the Horn.